Thank you for purchasing a DF908 lap machine by Deltech Fitness. Your DF908 will ship in 6 boxes. Sometimes boxes get separated in shipping, so if everything doesn't show up at the same time, be patient. The rest will likely come the next day. The long box contains the bottom frame, weight stack rods, front support, rear support, row bar, rear crossmember, lat bar, and selector rod. The other large box contains roller pads, a seat, upper pulley frame, stack pulley frame, hardware and wrenches, bottom support, foot plate, seat support, pulleys, footrest, instructions and stickers, seat bracket, lower pulley frame, shoes and mushroom caps, cables, rubber donuts, hold-down support, pulley flanges, selector pin, and stack pin. We'll start by grabbing the bottom frame. The bottom frame has indented square holes on the bottom to accept carriage bolts. Lay the bottom frame down on the floor on its side. Next, grab the rear support. It only has one flange welded to it. Line it up with the outside carriage bolt hole on the frame. Next, grab the bottom pulley frame and line it up with the neighboring holes, followed by the front support. The tab on the front support points inward toward the rear support. Next is the hold-down tube support. The pull pin on the hold-down tube points toward the rear support. Finally, we have the seat support. The pulley on the seat support faces toward the front of the lap machine. The carriage bolts included with the hardware pack have a square section right under the head. That square locks into the square holes in the bottom support and keeps the bolt from spinning while maintaining a low profile. First, we're going to bolt on the rear support. The rear support flange has 2 holes. Make sure to run the bolt through the hole farthest away from the tube. Then add a washer and a lock nut. Next, bolt the rest of the supports to the bottom frame. The 3 holes in the front of the bottom frame should remain empty. Before you tighten the carriage bolts, make sure that the square is actually locked into the square hole. Then push the bolt as you tighten it to keep it from jumping out of its hole. These 10mm lock nuts take a 17mm wrench or socket. We're using an impact wrench to speed up the process. When you get to the rear support, make sure that it's clocked correctly before tightening it all the way down. To attach the foot plate to the frame, we're going to use these flathead screws. They are cone-shaped and fit the countersunk holes on the foot plate. If you install these screws backwards, they won't allow the lap machine to lay flat on the ground. Line up the 3 holes of the foot plate with the 3 holes of the bottom frame. If the holes don't line up, rotate the plate 180 degrees. Thread the bolts through the foot plate, through the tube, through the flange on the footrest, then cap them off with washers and lock nuts. Tightening these bolts requires a large Phillips head screwdriver. Insert the screwdriver and hold the bolt while you tighten the nut. If you can't seem to get the nut tight and the bolt is spinning, try scratching the powder coat in the countersunk hole with the screwdriver. This might give the bolt enough extra grip to where it can bite and you can get the nut really tight. The easiest way of getting these bolts tight is an impact wrench. Next, we're going to stand the frame up and position it where it will live before it gets too heavy. Your hardware pack includes 2 very similar M12 bolts. One is slightly longer at 70mm compared to its 65mm counterpart. The 65mm bolts will not be used. Grab the rear crossmember and 2 rubber boots. The rear crossmember has holes on the sides, so position the long side of the boots on a side with no holes. Line up the holes of the rear crossmember with the holes on the flange of the bottom frame. Then thread the longer 70mm bolts through washers, through the rear crossmember, then through the flange. Top them off with some washers and lock nuts. Next, grab some 19mm wrenches and tighten the lock nuts all the way down. All Deltech fitness products come with lock nuts. Lock nuts have a nylon insert smaller than the diameter of the bolt. You have to tighten the bolt through the insert. The nylon then keeps the nut from coming loose. Next, grab the seat bracket, 2 of the shortest M10 bolts, and 2 washers. Start each bolt only a couple of threads before tightening them all the way down. If you tighten one down before the other is started, you will likely have issues getting the other bolt started. With both bolts tight, it's time to slip the seat bracket into the seat support. The tightened down knobs are usually shipped screwed in, so you will have to unscrew the tightened down knobs to slip the seat into place because the tightened down knob obstructs its way. After the other tighten down knob is out of the way, we will install the hold down tube. Lock it into place with the pull pin and then cinch it down with the tighten down knob. Next, grab the roller pads and slide them over the hold down tube. Finally, cap them off with some mushroom caps. The best tool for this job usually is a dead blow hammer, but in a pinch, a small dumbbell can also work. Just take your time and be gentle so you don't scratch the cap. If you try to hammer the cap in with a framing hammer or something smaller like that, you might end up cracking the cap. Next, grab the upper pulley frame and then slide it into the top of the supports. Grab your M12 by 70mm bolts, M12 washers, and run them in left to right. Next, grab the stack pulley frame. Slip it over the bolts, then add a washer and lock nut to keep it in place. Don't tighten them down at this time. Grab the bottom support and the remaining rubber boots. The side with the 3 big holes will end up being the top. Line it up with the holes on the side of the bottom frame. Then marry the two together with the long M10 by 70mm bolts. Tighten the lock nuts with 2 17mm wrenches. Next, grab the stack guide rods. The guide rods have a threaded insert in the top with M10 threads. Place them in the 2 outside holes of the bottom support, then lean them up against the machine. This next step is a good time to get organized. First, grab the rubber donuts, then slip them over the guide rods. The other 2 short M10 bolts go in the top of the guide rods. Next to me, I set up a flat bench to work as a workstation. I needed something I could reach while I load the stack. Unbox all the weights and lay them all the same direction. There's a plastic stopper on the weight bushings. The plastic stopper will be facing down. The weight plate with the 2 long bushings is the top plate and will be loaded last. Before we start loading the stack, we need to install the spring pin and selector rod into the top plate. The spring pin has a chamfered cone shape on one end. This will be the end going into the plate. The flat end will be the end being hammered. Start by tapping the spring pin into the middle hole of the top weight plate. Make sure that you're hammering the flat end, not the chamfered end. Once you get the spring pin started into the hole, place your finger in the middle of the weight plate to make sure that the pin doesn't come through. If you overshoot it and the pin does go through, you won't be able to get the selector rod through. If you overshoot the hole, simply place an M10 bolt in the other side and hammer it back out. The chamfered end of the selector rod will end up being the bottom. Line up the top hole of the selector rod with the spring pin, then gently tap until the top of the spring pin is flush with the end of the plate. Take your time so you don't damage the spring pin. With the selector rod installed and ready to go, it's time to load the stack. Again, the plastic bushings face down. Gently slide each weight plate down the guide rods and let them rest at the bottom. Don't let the plates just fall, you may damage the bushings. Finally, install the top plate and then bolt the rods into place. With the weight stack complete, it's time to run cables. Thread the small end of the first cable through the slot on the bottom of the front of the pulley frame. Then pull it through the large slot in the back. There's two different size pulleys on the machine. The smaller 3.5-inch pulleys go into the pulley frame. Grab the M10 bolts, washers, plastic bushings, and nuts to install the first pulley. The small end of the bushing will be inserted into the side holes on the pulley frame to keep the pulley centered. Place the cable in the slot of the pulley, then thread the bolt through a washer, the bushing, into the pulley, then out the other side. Insert the other bushing and cap it off with a washer and nut. Repeat the same process with the same size pulley in the back, but you're going to use the front hole in the back. Before we install the next pulley, we need to put together the floating pulley assembly. Sandwich two large 4.5-inch pulleys with the pulley flanges. Then bolt them together with M10 bolts, washers, and nuts. We're going to bolt the bottom pulley through the bottom widest hole first. Next, we need to install the weight stack bolt. Screw the bolt into the weight stack approximately 1.5 inches, leaving some room for adjustment up and down later. Next, grab another M10 bolt, bushings, washer, and a small pulley. Thread the small end of the cable through the floating pulley assembly, then over the small pulley. Put the small pulley into the stack pulley frame with the cable facing the outside of the machine. Then attach the cable to the stack with a snap hook. Now it's time to install the lower cable. Thread the small end of the lower cable over the keeper bar, through the slot in the seat support, then through the other two slots and out the back. When you go to bolt the pulley on, make sure to line the cable up in the V-groove of the pulley. If somehow the cable comes out of the V-groove and you bolt it in, it won't be able to find the groove and it won't function as intended. Next, find the last large pulley and bolt it into the bottom pulley frame with the same size M10 bolt, washers, and nut. line the cable up in the V-groove of the bottom pulley. Then thread the cable through the floating pulley assembly and back down. Making sure the cable is in the grooves of all the pulleys, clip the cable to the tab on the front support. At this point, the lap machine should be fully functional, and it's time to set the tension of the cables. We're going to go up one hole at a time on the pulley flanges until the cable's tight. This particular machine felt about right on the third hole up. With everything in place, it's time to test out the machine. If everything feels smooth, then that means you did everything correctly. If something feels like it's dragging or there's friction, it's likely that the cable came off of one of your pulleys. With everything working as it should, it's time to tighten all the bolts. Don't over-tighten the bolts in the top upper pulley frame because you might damage the plastic bushings. This next step is recommended, but not required. The weight stack is oily when it first comes out of the box, so I like to give it a wipe down with acetone to take the oil off before applying the stickers. While I'm using acetone, you can use any degreaser, or even water and a wet rag. Just make sure that it's completely dry before trying to apply the stickers. Another trick that I've learned to make the stickers look as neat as possible is to run a piece of tape down the entire stack to use as a straight edge. Carefully apply all the stickers as straight as possible. Come back in 24 hours and run your hands over the stickers one extra time to make sure that they're set. Insert the stack pin and put the key ring through the snap hook. Finally, install your model number sticker, just in case you need help in the future. Finish it off with your Deltech Fitness decal. Finally, it's time to clip on your attachments and get to work. Thank you for choosing Deltech Fitness.